The morning my neighbor pressed a folded piece of paper into my hand and told me not to go home alone, I thought she was confused. Rosemary was 81 years old, and she forgot things sometimes: her keys, her glasses, the names of people she had known for decades. I thanked her gently and tucked the paper into my coat pocket, the way you do when you want to be kind without being unkind. I did not read it until I was already in my car. It said, "They were in the house while you were at church. I saw them go in. Your daughter has a key she didn't get from you." I sat in Rosemary's driveway for a long time, with the engine running and the heat blowing against my face. Outside, the Tennessee hills were brown and bare the way they get in February, stripped down to their bones. The sky was white and low. My hands were in my lap, and I noticed they were perfectly still, which surprised me, because everything inside me was not. My daughter had been in my house. That alone should not have frightened me. She was my daughter. She had grown up in that house, learned to walk in that hallway, fallen asleep on that living room floor more times than I could count. But my daughter had not spoken to me in 11 days, not since the argument about my husband's estate, and she had not had a key to that house since the locks were changed 2 years ago, after her boyfriend, a man I had never been able to trust, let himself in without asking, and I came home to find him in my husband's office. I drove home, slowly. The house looked exactly the way I had left it. White clapboard, green shutters, the hydrangea bushes my husband planted the year our youngest was born. The gravel drive curved past the old workshop and the storage barn, and then opened into the small clearing where we had always parked. Nothing out of place. But standing at my kitchen door, key in hand, I felt something shift behind my sternum, a wrongness that had no shape yet. Inside, nothing was moved. Nothing was missing. That was almost worse than if something had been. It meant they were careful. It meant they had been looking for something specific and had not found it, or had found it and replaced it exactly as it was. My husband had died 7 months before. A heart attack, the doctor said. Sudden, unpredicted, the kind that gives no warning. He had been 68 years old and strong as wire, and he was gone in the time it took me to drive to the grocery store and back. I had not yet learned how to move through a day that did not include him. Some mornings I still turned to say something and found only the wall. His name was Thomas. He had been a quiet man, careful and deliberate in everything he did. He kept records the way other men kept pets, faithfully, without fail, with a kind of love that most people reserved for living things. He believed that documentation was the highest form of respect for the truth. In the weeks after his death, I had found small evidence of this everywhere. Receipts, organized by date. Insurance policies annotated in the margins. A folder in his filing cabinet labeled simply, "Read if I'm gone," that contained a letter to me. One to our daughter, one to our son who lived in Arizona, and a document from an attorney in Nashville that I had set aside because I was not yet ready to understand what it meant. I went to that filing cabinet now. The folder was there. Everything in it was exactly where I had left it, but the drawer below it, the one that held property records and old tax filings, that one was wrong. Not obviously. A person who didn't know Thomas would never notice. But the folders inside were arranged by size instead of by year, and Thomas had never arranged anything by size in his life. Someone had gone through this drawer and put it back the wrong way. I sat down on the floor of his office, which I rarely entered because the grief in that room was still too dense to breathe through, and I pressed my back against the desk and tried to think clearly. My daughter had always been difficult. That was not a cruel thing to say, it was simply true. And Thomas and I had spoken about it honestly for 30 years. She was brilliant and restless, and she chose men the way other people chose bad weather, by walking directly into it. Her boyfriend had been in her life for 4 years. He sold things, equipment, I believed, though I had never been entirely clear on the details. He drove an expensive truck and wore a watch that cost more than my monthly utilities, and whenever I asked him direct questions, he answered with other questions, the way a man does when he has learned that honesty is a liability. His name was Derek, and my husband had not trusted him either. That was the thing I kept circling back to as I sat on the floor of that office. Thomas had not trusted Derek. He had said so clearly, once, 6 months before he died. We were sitting on the porch after dinner, and my daughter had called. And after Thomas hung up, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "There's something wrong with that man, and I don't know yet what it is, but I'm going to find out." I had not asked him what he meant. I wish I had. I got up off the floor, went to the kitchen, and made coffee I did not drink. Then I unfolded Rosemary's note again and read it a second time. "They were in the house while you were at church. I saw them go in. Your daughter has a key she didn't get from you." They. Not just my daughter? Both of them. I called Rosemary. She answered on the third ring, out of breath the way she always was, as if life perpetually surprised her. "How long were they inside?" I asked. "Almost an hour," she said. I watched from my kitchen window. I almost called the police, but then I thought, she's your daughter. And maybe you knew. A pause. "Did you know?" "No," I said. I didn't know. That night I went through the rest of his office. I was not looking for anything specific. I was looking for what was missing, the negative space of a careful man's life, the places where something should be and wasn't. I found it in the lower left drawer of his desk, behind a false panel that I had not known existed until I pressed the wood backing by accident and felt it give. The space behind it was empty, but it had not always been. The wood was cleaner there, protected from dust, and there were faint impressions in the lining where something rectangular had rested for a long time. A box, or a case, something that had been removed recently. I sat with that knowledge until well past midnight. The next morning, my daughter called. Her voice was careful in the way it got when she wanted something bright on the surface and controlled underneath. She asked how I was sleeping, whether I had spoken to the estate attorney, whether I had given any more thought to the idea of listing the property. I told her I had been thinking about it. She exhaled slowly, a sound of relief she had not meant for me to hear. "Mom, I really think it's the right move. This house is too big for one person. The land alone, you can't manage 15 acres by yourself at your age." At your age. I was 64 years old. I had been managing this property longer than she had been alive. "Let me think a little longer," I said. "Derek has a contact," she said quickly. "A developer who's been looking in this area. It wouldn't even have to go through a realtor. Clean, fast, fair price." I thanked her and hung up. A developer. I drove to the county records office that afternoon, something I had never done before in my life. The woman behind the counter was patient with me and explained how to search property filings. I spent 2 hours there, reading documents I did not fully understand, until I found something that made me stop. 3 months before my husband died, someone had filed a request to survey the eastern portion of our property, a section that bordered an old county road and backed up against state forest land. The filing was technically procedural, the kind of thing that happened when a boundary was in question. But the name on the request was a company I did not recognize, and when I searched that company on my phone, its registered agent was a name I did know: Derek. I drove home with both hands tight on the wheel and my jaw aching from holding it still. Thomas had known. He had known, and he had been gathering something proof, I thought, or protection, and he had hidden it in that compartment in his desk. And now it was gone. I thought about the survey request. I thought about the developer contact my daughter mentioned, without hesitating. I thought about Derek's expensive watch, and his non-answers and the 4 years he had spent quietly inside my family's life. And then I thought about the letter in the filing cabinet, the one from the Nashville attorney, the one I had not yet read. I read it that night, at the kitchen table, with every light in the house on. It was dated 5 months before Thomas died. It confirmed a meeting he had attended in which he provided documentation to the attorney, financial records, photographs, and what the letter described as recorded communications regarding unauthorized surveying activity and intent to defraud. The attorney wrote that he had advised Thomas to involve law enforcement and that Thomas had asked for more time to gather additional evidence before taking that step. There was a second page, a handwritten note in Thomas's handwriting, paper-clipped to the back. If you are reading this, I wasn't careful enough. Everything I gathered is in the rosewood box in my desk. Use it. Don't wait. Don't let them talk you out of it. The land has been in your family as long as it's been in mine, and they want it for what's underneath. The East Field, there was a mineral survey done without our permission, and the results were never shared with us. I don't know exactly what they found, but Derek does, and he's been working toward this since before we knew his name. I read the note 4 times. What's underneath the East Field? The rosewood box was gone. I did not panic. I want to be clear about that, because it surprised me too. Something went very quiet inside me, in the way that only happens when the fear becomes too large for noise. I folded the note and put it back in its envelope, and I went to bed. And I lay in the dark listening to the house the way I had listened to it every night for 37 years, and I thought about what Thomas would have done next. He would have made a copy. Thomas always made a copy. He believed in redundancy the way he believed in everything else completely, practically, without drama. One original, one backup, in a separate location. I closed my eyes and tried to remember him the way he actually was. Not the softened version grief creates, but the real version, the methodical and sometimes maddening man who labeled the back of every photograph and kept a second set of keys for everything. In the morning, I drove to our church. I went to find Pastor Glenn, who had been Thomas's closest friend for 22 years. I found him in the fellowship hall setting up chairs. He saw my face and stopped what he was doing immediately. He gave you something, I said. Before he died, Glenn set down the chair he was holding. He looked at me for a long moment with an expression I recognized, the expression of a man who has been waiting for a specific conversation to begin. He gave me an envelope, he said. About 4 months before he passed, he told me to hold it until you asked for it. He said you'd know when to ask. He went to his office and came back with a manila envelope, sealed, my name on the front, in Thomas's handwriting. Beside my name, in smaller letters, "When you're ready." I sat in a pew and opened it. Inside was a USB drive and 3 printed pages. The pages were summaries, bank records, showing payments made to a shell company, photographs of survey equipment on our East Field taken at night, and a document that appeared to be an internal communication between Derek and 2 other people I didn't recognize, discussing mineral extraction rights to a property they described as currently owner-occupied, but accessible within 12 to 18 months. 12 to 18 months. Thomas had found this. He had known the timeline. He died 7 months later. I pressed my hand flat against the pew in front of me and breathed. Glenn sat beside me. He told me something else, he said carefully. He said if you ever came to me for this envelope, I should tell you to call a woman named Patricia Hale at the Tennessee Department of Commerce. He'd already spoken to her. She was expecting to hear from you eventually. I called Patricia Hale from the church parking lot. She answered before the second ring. Mrs. Calloway, she said, before I had said anything beyond my name. I've been hoping you'd call. She told me that Thomas had been working with her office for 3 months before his death. The mineral survey conducted on our property without consent had flagged a significant lithium deposit beneath the East Field, the kind of discovery that turned ordinary farmland into something worth considerably more than farmland. Prices. Derek had connected with investors before our family knew anything existed. The plan had been to acquire the land either through purchase or legal maneuver, and if those failed, through other means. What other means? I asked. She paused. Guardianship proceedings, she said. Competency challenges. The kind of legal tools that are designed to protect vulnerable people but can be weaponized against them. Your daughter had consulted a family law attorney 6 weeks before your husband's death. I sat in my car and watched a group of children cross the church parking lot with their mother and thought about how ordinary everything looked from the outside. How completely ordinary. My husband's death, I said. Was it? The investigation is ongoing, Patricia said. I can't speak to that yet. What I can tell you is that what you have on that USB drive, combined with what Thomas gave us before he died, is enough to move forward. But we need you to be careful for the next few days. Careful how? We believe they'll approach you directly very soon. They've been patient, but they're running out of time on the investment timeline. When they do, and I think it will be soon, we need you to respond without letting them know what you know. I drove home. I made lunch. I sat in the kitchen and waited. My daughter called that evening. Her voice was different this time, still careful, but with an edge underneath it, something impatient pressing up against the surface. She asked if she could come by the following afternoon. She and Derek had something they needed to discuss with me in person. Of course, I said. I'll make coffee. That night I called my son in Arizona. He was the first person I had told any of this to, and I told him everything slowly and completely, the way Thomas would have wanted. My son did not speak for a long time when I finished. Then he said, I'm getting on a plane. Wait, I said. Wait 2 more days. I spent the night going through what Thomas had left me. The USB drive contained over 200 files, photographs, audio recordings, financial records, emails, and a video Thomas had taken himself on his phone, showing survey equipment being operated on our east field at 2 in the morning, while our house sat dark at the end of the drive. In the video, he narrates quietly, his voice low and steady. The date, the time, the description of the equipment, the license plate of the truck. His voice does not shake. He sounds like a man doing what needs to be done. I watched it 4 times. The 5th time, I had to stop. They arrived at 2 in the afternoon, my daughter and Derek, pulling into my driveway in his expensive truck as if they owned the approach. My daughter came in first and hugged me the way she had when she was in high school, and needed something with her whole body, briefly, before getting to the point. Derek hung back near the door, looking at the room the way he always did, cataloging it. My daughter sat across from me at the kitchen table. Derek remained standing. Mom, she said, we need to talk honestly. All right, I said. She laid it out carefully. The property was a financial burden. My health, while currently fine, would not always permit me to manage 15 acres alone. The offer from the developer was generous, far above market rate for agricultural land in this county. The transaction could close in 30 days. I would receive more than enough to live comfortably for the rest of my life. It's a good deal, Derek said from near the door. His first words, straightforward. I looked at my daughter. I looked at her the way I had when she was small and had done something she wasn't proud of. And I waited. What's underneath the east field? I said. The room went still. Derek's expression did not change. But something behind it did a small, careful recalibration that a person who hadn't been watching for it would have missed entirely. My daughter leaned back slightly. What do you mean? The lithium deposit, I said. The one surveyed without our permission. The one your father found evidence of before he died. My daughter's face went through 3 different expressions in 2 seconds. Derek took a step away from the door. Mom, the investors your boyfriend has been in contact with for over a year, I said. Before we knew this land was worth anything more than farmland. You don't understand what you're... I understand exactly, I said. And so does the Department of Commerce. Derek moved toward the table. Mrs. Calloway, let's be reasonable here. Whatever you think you know, I know what Thomas left me, I said. Every document, every photograph, every recording. Derek stopped. My daughter looked at him. And in that look I saw the thing I had spent 3 decades hoping I would never see. She looked at him first. Not at me. As if he were the authority. As if he were the one whose reaction told her what to do next. That hurt more than anything else that had happened. Where is the rosewood box? I asked quietly. My daughter said nothing. Derek put his hands in his pockets, which is what men do when they are trying to look calm. The sound of tires on gravel came from outside. Derek turned toward the window. 3 vehicles came down my drive, 2 unmarked sedans, and a county sheriff's cruiser. Patricia Hale stepped out of the first sedan, and beside her was a man I did not recognize in a dark jacket, who moved with the measured calm of someone who had done this many times. Derek looked at the window, and then at me, and then at the door. The calculation was visible on his face for exactly 3 seconds before he understood that the door was not an option. My daughter stood up so fast her chair scraped back hard against the floor. "Mom." Her voice had lost all its careful brightness. "Mom, please." I looked at her. I want to tell you I felt cold in that moment, or righteous, or vindicated. But what I actually felt was tired. Tired and heartbroken and so deeply sad for the woman she had become that I could not speak for a moment. "Your father knew," I said. "He knew you were involved. He protected you from it, for as long as he could." She covered her mouth with her hand. When Patricia and the agents came through the door, Derek was already moving toward compliance. A man who had calculated his odds and was now calculating his best remaining position. My daughter did not move. She stood in the middle of my kitchen, with her hand over her mouth, and when they led Derek outside in handcuffs, she watched him go, as if watching a bridge collapse she had spent 4 years building. She was not arrested that day. Her involvement, Patricia explained to me later, was complicated. She had participated in the planning, but the evidence against Derek was considerably stronger. That would be for attorneys and eventually a court to sort out. What I understood was that my daughter had been told exactly what that land contained, and she had chosen to act on it without telling me. She had chosen him over her father, over me. She tried to speak to me before they took her in for questioning. I held up one hand. "Not today," I said. "We'll talk when there's something left that's true between us." My son arrived the following morning on the first flight out of Phoenix. He walked into my kitchen and held me for a long time without saying anything. Which was exactly right. We sat at the table together, and I showed him the letter Thomas had written me, the one I had finally allowed myself to read all the way through, and we sat with it between us in silence. The way you sit with something precious that has also cost you everything. Thomas had written, "I know this isn't what either of us wanted. I know it isn't the family we tried to build. But you are not the family we built. You are the one who made it possible. I need you to trust yourself the way I have always trusted you, which is completely." I folded the letter and put it back in the envelope and held it in my lap. The weeks that followed were the strangest of my life in some ways, and the clearest in others. Investigators documented the East Field. The unauthorized survey was formally invalidated. The investors Derek had worked with were identified and faced their own proceedings. The shell company dissolved under scrutiny. One by one, the threads of a scheme that had grown quietly around my life were pulled apart and laid flat in the light. The property was mine. It had always been mine, but now I knew what it meant, that it was mine not as a pleasant fact, but as something that had been fought for, documented, and defended by a man who loved me enough to do it alone, so that I would not have to be afraid while he was still alive to stand between me and it. I spoke to my daughter for the first time 3 months later. We met at a coffee shop in town, neutral ground, and sat across from each other with cups we both held too tightly. She was thinner. She looked like she had not been sleeping. She told me she had believed Derek's version for a long time, that the land would be sold anyway eventually, that we were sitting on something that belonged in better use, that Thomas was being unreasonable in wanting to hold it. She said she had told herself it was practical, not dishonest. She said she knew now that was not true. I listened. I did not tell her that I forgave her, because I wasn't sure yet if I did, and Thomas had taught me never to say things I wasn't sure of. What I told her was that I loved her, that I had always loved her. That love was not the same as trust. and we would have to rebuild the second thing slowly if we were going to have anything honest between us. She nodded. She was crying. I did not reach across the table, because some things have to be crossed by the person who created the distance. But I stayed. The east field in spring looks the way it has always looked, rough grass coming in early, the slope down toward the county road catching the light in the afternoon, the old fence line my husband repaired every 3 or 4 years without being asked. I have walked it every morning since the investigators left. I put my boots on and I go out into the cold and I walk the land the way Thomas walked it. Because it is mine and because I am still here, and because standing on something worth fighting for is its own form of gratitude. At 64, I know things I did not know at 40 or 50. I know that the people you raise are still separate people, capable of choices you cannot make for them. I know that grief does not end. It only changes shape. I know that a man who prepares quietly for every possible outcome because he loves you is the rarest kind of man. And I know this. The most dangerous thing about being taken advantage of is not the moment it happens. It is the long, slow period before, when everything looks ordinary and you tell yourself you are imagining things. When the signs are there but you choose softness over sight because softness is easier. I choose sight now. The land is still here. The mineral rights belong to no one but me. The house needs painting this summer, and the hydrangeas need to be cut back. And the workshop door still drags on its hinge the way it has since the year we bought the place. These are the things that remain. Thomas left me 3 gifts: the truth, the tools to protect it, and the quiet certainty that I was strong enough to use them. I did not know I was strong enough. Now I do.